A few days ago, I was scrolling my life away on Instagram when I saw my friend selling part of his Game Boy collection. I love retro games, so I hit him up, sent him some money, and then 2 days later, I received a package. I now own an original 1998 Game Boy Color, but there is a small problem, that being that I don't have any games. Original copies of some of the really good Game Boy Color games are quite pricey, so I took to the internet to find a more cost-effective approach. And I stumbled across one of these. This is an Easy Flash Junior, and it allows me to load ROM files onto an SD card, slot the SD card into the cartridge, and then play the games that are so legally acquired. I now had both a Game Boy Color and some playable games, but I feel like it could be better. I wanted to give this 1998 Game Boy Color a modern 2023 makeover. So I hit up my friend Disuko, who has experience modding the Game Boy lineup, and we got to work. The biggest flaw with the Game Boy Color is definitely the screen. It's fine by 1998 standards, but nowadays we're used to significantly nicer and way more versatile screens. We checked out some options and decided to go with the screen that Disuko had used in their personal Game Boy Color, and that is the funny playing laminated IPS display. The screen should offer vivid colors, good brightness and viewing angles, and overall a much more enjoyable experience. Now, the screen doesn't quite fit into the regular shell, so I will have to get a new one. Luckily, there are a lot of options to choose from, and they had exactly the color I was looking for in stock. On top of this, we'll throw in some new buttons, new membranes, a new speaker, and add a little charm on the top because it's cute, why not? So for planning, that's it. Now I just have to send it off to Disuko, who is admittedly much more skilled at this than I am, and let them work their magic.
Hello everybody, my name is Disuko, and let's monetize Game Boy. We're going to start off by removing the 4 tri-ring screws from the back of the Game Boy. They're on the corners and the middle, and then there are 2 inside of the battery cover, which are pretty easy to miss. And once we have the shell off, we can then remove the screws on the motherboard. There's a ribbon cable at the top for the display, which we can just undo these little tabs and then slide it right out. And then our motherboard is separated from the screen. This part's kind of cursed, but you kind of gotta like twist the shell to loosen the adhesive on the display, and then it comes right out. Out of the front part of the shell, we can grab the membranes and buttons. Sometimes I like to reuse the original membranes just because they're already broken in and they feel like the original, which is pretty nice to have. We can put aside the shell and the screen for now, because now we're just going to clean the original motherboard, make sure that there's no corrosion on it, generally just clean up any dust and grime that might have accumulated over the over 20 years that this thing has been around. It's time to start soldering. Now it's time for some soldering. This is pretty basic, just removing the speaker so we can replace it later on. I can proceed with tinning up the solder points that are on the ribbon cable. So basically these are just start, select, and power. Wiring up power will let our screen get a little bit more juice and be able to be brighter, and the start and select allow us to change the brightness of the screen and other settings using the actual buttons on the Game Boy, which is really cool. So I'm basically just going to apply a little blob of solder to each one of those to make it easier to put the wires on later. I can then attach the ribbon cable back to the display with the little Lego brick connector. Okay, while I have the front part of the new shell all ready to go, I'm going to just drop the buttons in and put the membranes on top. And now to solder on the wires, there's a couple of points that you can use on the Game Boy. There's some ones that are kind of the official ones up near the cart slot, but then there's also some down here, little test points. They're a little bit easier to access, so I'm going to go for those. I'm going to use plenty of flux and just tin up all those pads to get them ready to connect to the screen. So now that all of our contact points are tinned up, I can move on to connecting the wires. It's really easy. I'm just going to heat up the solder, push the wire in, and connect it to its respective points on the Game Boy itself. And the difficult one is the power wire, because it actually has to connect on a contact on the power switch to get power to the screen. That was a sentence. This one can be a little tricky, but with plenty of flux, just adding some solder to the third point on the power switch, it's pretty easy to just get the wire on there. That one's a little difficult, but overall it's a pretty simple process. Now that everything's all connected up, I can sandwich the 2 parts of the Game Boy back together, being careful not to have my wires overlapping any screw posts. And I'm going to do kind of one final test of the touch sensor and all the controls before finally screwing it back together and sending it off to Telestro.
After a few days of not so patient waiting,
Dude, where is this guy?
The finished product was finally delivered, and to be honest, I have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Rondo. Yo. I should make this the credits soon.